Hola y bienvenidos. Welcome to Thursdays for the Soul, a webinar series for the whole church. We faithfully focus on care and education for the people of God and create opportunities to digitally worship together as the whole of the United Church of Christ. From prayer, music, and psalms to interviews of key leaders and how-tos in congregational life. This series stays current to the relevant topics of the time and offers opportunities of connection in the wider church and in your community. Together, we can bring our church and the world towards the word God imagines for us all. Buen dia, I am Reverend Loreto Ochoa, the Associate for Congregations of Color and Ethnic Identified Congregations for the United Church of Christ. I am your host for today's program, Queerness and Disability, showing up as our full selves. And for the benefit of our sighted impaired attendees, I am a Latino man with dark hair and eyes, wearing a striped dress shirt, sitting in my home office here in New England. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to share some upcoming programs for you. On Thursday, January 20th, we present Let Us Worship as One Body, led by the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Lindsay, who is our UCC Minister of Worship and Gospel Arts. And on Thursday, January 27th, please join us as we have an important conversation on vibrant reentry and voters' rights. Please join Reverend Tracy Blackman and Desmond Meade, a formerly incarcerated civil rights activist and recent MacArthur Genius Grant awardee, as they discuss the church's role in welcoming returning citizens. Desmond Meade's work centers on restoring voting rights to formerly incarcerated citizens and removing barriers to their re-entry into everyday life. All our Thursdays for the Soul digital programs begin at 10:30 a.m. Hawaiian time, 12:30 Pacific, 1:30 Mountain, 2:30 Central, and 3:30 p.m. Eastern times. And if these hours inspire you in any way and you would like to continue supporting ministries like this, please consider donating to the annual fund by texting UCC to 41444. That's UCC to 41444. Now for today's programs. To many of both the LGBTQ plus and disability communities, the intersection between queerness and disability may not be obvious. But for people who identify as both queer and disabled, this particular intersectional identity can strongly inform their understandings of self, others, and God. And we are pleased to have us queer and disabled members of the UCC Disabilities Ministries Board as they discuss invisible identities, self-discovery, and living outside the box. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Becca Marin Anderson, pronouns she and her, who is the co-chair of the UCC Disabilities Ministries Board and who will lead the conversation and to introduce our panel for today. Hola, Becca. So excited for today's topic. Take it away, mi hermana.
Thank you so much, Roberto. And thank you so much to Chris, Jennifer, Laurel, and everyone else who's made this program possible. So as Roberto said, we are talking about the intersection between queerness and disability today. And we felt that this was an important topic to share with the wider church because there are so many people in the world and in our churches who exist at the intersection of queerness and disability. And that intersection is often very important to many of us. So the three of us here today, of course, can't speak to the experience of all queer disabled people, but we're hoping that by sharing our experiences and some resources, we can invite the wider church into this conversation about how to honor the challenges and the amazing perspectives that come with living as both queer and disabled. A note about questions today. This will be a panel style discussion, and as such, we would love to leave a time for some audience questions towards the end of our session today. So if you have any questions that are coming up for you, you can feel free to put them in the Zoom Q&A box as we're going along, and we'll answer those towards the end. If you have a clarifying question, you need us to explain something we just said, you can put that in the chat. And I believe Jennifer is monitoring that, and we'll make sure it gets brought to our attention. So with that, let's introduce our panelists. I will start with myself. As Roberta said, my name is Becca Anderson. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman in my mid-20s. I have long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. I'm wearing a red shirt and wearing glasses. And some words that I use to describe myself in relation to queerness and disability. I am queer on the bisexual end of the sexuality continuum. And my disability is blindness. I describe myself as blind, visually impaired, or just disabled. So I'd now like to invite my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. So if you both could say your names, pronouns, self-description, and words you use to describe yourself. Let's start with Helen. Helen, you probably need to unmute yourself.
Hey, I got the unmute bingo. My name's Helen Walsh. Sorry, now we have a catastrophe. I'm an authentic person. My pronouns are she and her. I have light brown hair with a little bit of wave, freckles, glasses, wearing kind of a rust-colored shirt with a collar. I'm sitting in my living room. Let's see how I define myself, Crip queer. Sometimes I might call myself, hey, I'm one of those hybrid people because you don't see my disability, but it's all here. And I may not look what you expect a queer person to look like, but it's all here. So that's, I guess those are the two, or just by name. I define myself by my name, Helen.
Awesome, thank you, Helen. And Jess.
Hey y'all, I'm Reverend Jess Chansey. You call me Jess. My pronouns are they, them. For description's sake, I am a white, youngish, middle-aged, genderqueer person with short red hair, wearing a black shirt with white stripes. I'm sitting in my hospital office where I work as a hospital chaplain. On the other side is where the Catholic priests sit, which is why there's a lovely crucifix over here. And I define myself as queer, both in orientation as well as in gender. And my disabilities are complex PTSD and an autoimmune condition.
Awesome, thank you both so much. So let's start with this. Tell us a brief story about the connections you see between your queerness and your disability. Let's reverse the order this time. Let's start with Jess.
Keeping us on our toes, Becca.
You bet.
Yeah, so especially with the PTSD, that is very closely entwined with my identity as a queer person, because my particular trauma history is really heavily entwined with sexual assault. And I grew up in a very conservative household where homosexuality and queerness was the butt of a joke at best, wrong at worst. And so there was a lot of internalized oppression, a lot of internal homophobia. And so you could even say I was trying to self-inflict some kind of conversion therapy. So I overcompensated for my attraction to women and my feeling like I didn't really feel like a boy or a girl, or even really just in between. I just felt like none of it really made any sense. So I kind of overcompensated by trying to go out with the first guy that asked me out, who ended up assaulting me, continually going out with abusers and assaulters, that's the word, I'm going to use it, and really hyper femming myself up. That even long after I came out, that habit was so ingrained in me, because part of of trauma is that constant re-traumatization that a lot of us with PTSD experience. We keep re-experiencing it. And the more and more I started to experience paranoia and hypervigilance and anxiety and depression, all part of this disability, the more I sought comfort and safety, which I was seeking in men and in hyperfemininity, in the smokescreen, the beard, etc. So my queerness and my PTSD are so very, very intertwined. It's hard to disentangle them at all. But then when I realized that I have an autoimmune disorder as well, and I first had the experience of inflammation in my knees, and I started having to get to use a cane, I found that even canes are gendered in the store. And so here's a genderqueer person shopping for a cane. Do I get a women's cane or a men's cane? And it's like, okay, the women's cane has flowers and sequins on it. The men's cane comes in a variety of styles and has like animal head tops on it. It might even have a hidden sword or a flask or something. Can I just get a normal cane? So yeah, it feels like even mobility assistance devices are not trans friendly. So that's how I experience it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jess. Yeah, I'm carrying the intersections of trauma and the gender and sexuality are in everything, every aspect of how we experience the world, including how we relate to our disability. Thank you. Helen, tell us a brief story about the connections between your queerness and disability.
Well, it's kind of interesting because my connection between queerness and disability is a path I walked my whole life, really unknowingly, because in the beginning of my development, being raised in an Irish Catholic family, nobody ever sat down and talked to me about being a lesbian, being queer, being gay, or what. I just knew. It's not like I don't like men. I do like men. I just don't have the same interests, let's just say. So it's not a like or a dislike thing. I wish people would understand it that way a little bit better. It's not, I think men are attractive. I think women are attractive, and we'll just leave it there, So, and then when it comes to disability, I have a hidden disability. I mean, I don't look like, at the time I was coming out as gay, I don't look the typical, at that time, people were more butch than me. I wasn't one that wanted to put the keys on my back pocket, but I did. I tried to figure out how to fit in societal. I tried everything. I had I used to put razor marks when you use a buzzer, had my hair short, all that stuff. You try it on. Thank goodness for me, I'm an artist. So between the music and the art throughout my whole entire life, I've been exposed. Some of my mentors were from the queer community, gay community, bi community, disabled community, you name it, through my whole life. So I identify as something that's more walking the path than I do in a way of saying I have to prove something, or I have to say something, or you have to be a certain way around me. I had the privilege to be part of the first historical queer disability conference that took place in 2003 in the University of San Francisco. Corbett O'Toole, who was one of the organizers, is one of my mentors. So I kind of was always in, although I have to say, being a person with a hidden disability that often people do not see, that actually is more problematic for me to figure out, how do I describe myself? I have multiple sclerosis. I've experienced every kind of disability one can experience, from losing my sight to being paralyzed to having immune issues, side effects from treatments, muscle weakness and all that stuff. So with having a disability that doesn't necessarily people see unless it surprises you, and then it surprises everybody else, where you kind of have to well, I'm going to be using a cane for, you know, a couple of months until it's a we'll see kind of a thing. So in terms of, you know, those areas, I think the vocabulary as a person with a hidden disability that likes to say, hey there, every so often. I think I define myself with my disability just pure out confidence of this is who I am. This is what I have to utilize as a modality or as an adaptation for this time being. And hey, I'll stick with you. And here's who I am. If you're uncomfortable with it, well, I'm okay at that. I'm not going to yell at you, but maybe you ought to get to know me. So I just kind of go from that perspective, from walking this path my whole life of really not having a place of fitting in. And I actually like floating out there in the universe. It's kind of nice, although it's nice to find home at times. There you have it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Helen. I'm hearing in that themes, some of which resonate with what Jess said, you know, the themes of, you know, which parts of our identity are visible for other people to see. And, you know, do we do performance to make them visible, or do we try to perform to make them invisible? And, you know, how does that give us access to community or make it harder for us to connect with our community?
Yeah. Call mine Helen vision, because you define yourself, right? Your disability doesn't define you, you define, and you define what your disability is, but it's you who actually defines yourself. So you can be all yourself about that. That's a good one.
Totally. So yeah, my story touches on some similar themes. I've been visually impaired pretty much all of my life, but didn't really identify as disabled until college, when I started learning about disability as a justice issue and disability as an identity. And I actually started learning about that through a queer studies class. I was taking a class on queer studies, and we had a unit on disability studies and the ways that queer studies and disability studies have intersected. And I sat there going, I didn't know disability studies was a thing, let alone that it had a relationship to queer studies. And so I started learning about that from an academic sense, but then as my disabled identity began to be more important to me, and as I started finding it to be more important to tell people about my queerness, I really started to see them as related. That, you know, one of the things that's important to me about disability as an identity, as opposed to just something that is physically or mentally true about my body or mind, is that I believe that my identity insists on things being other than they are. The world is not made for disabled people. A disabling condition means that you face access barriers, and the world does not, in its current form in most settings, meet our needs. And insisting on disability as an identity says, okay, but it should. And queerness to me kind of feels very similar, in that I'm saying, I'm, you know, looking at this world that you know, the dominant societal standards say there are men and there are women and they are attracted to each other, the end. And saying, actually, what if there are many genders? What if there are many ways to be attracted to many genders, and many ways of people coming together to show love for one another? And so both queerness and disability to me open up possibility and seek to make more possibilities in the face of dominant societal standards that want to create less possibilities. So that's something that resonates for me, and that I think I hear in your stories, Jess and Helen, you both butting up against the ways that people want to define you and tell you what is possible for you. So next, I'm wondering if we could talk a bit about how our queerness and disability inform our faith and spirituality. Helen, do you want to start us off on that?
Sure. Well, It's kind of an interesting question because I don't think in detailed orientation when it comes to my life as a queer disabled person. In terms of my spirituality and how it informs that, I do believe it has provided me a better education in life, to be more open to differences in all people. To also understand there are different identities. My whole time coming up, when I was, I guess you call it coming out in the 90s during the AIDS crisis, but we didn't talk much about gender identity back then. But thankfully, I was around a lot of people that did have these discussions. So, in terms of faith and community, my community is inside and outside of church. That's how it defines me. Church, to me, is a large group of people. You couldn't even know everybody who is in that group. It's the world and that. So on a broader perspective, I just think it has created an ability in me to be more open to other people's preferences, specifics, likes and dislikes, or just how they may, approach a topic that, hey, I might be uncomfortable with, but at the same time, I'm comfortable with. So I think it's in the balance. So, my faith and spirituality is not defined by a name of a church either. It's defined by the church being the community of which I have an interaction and a robust interaction with at that. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, what I'm hearing in that is, your own openness to all the possibilities within yourself also makes you open to all of the possibilities within other people, and an openness to a church much larger than the typical narrative would say it is. Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Oh yeah, that's lovely. Well, for me, what's kind of funny is that queerness is what brought me to the church. And it's funny because so many people that I meet or have met since becoming a member of the LGBTQ plus community in terms of being out, the church with a capital C has hurt so many of us. And, growing up, a lot of the denigration of queer folk was in so-called Christian terms. God hates F word for gay men or D word for gay women. Don't even mention trans people. And so for that reason, I never really felt connected to the church, even while feeling all of this internalized homophobia and transphobia. I was still really caring about other people who were coming out. Like when I was in high school, one of my best friends came out as lesbian. I had some gay friends, I had some bi friends, and I just wanted to love and care for them while also not being able to accept it in myself. And so seeing how they were treated by people who were calling themselves Christian made me really hate the church. And so it was then when I actually, in my first career as an opera singer, looked for a very hesitantly and annoyedly looked for a church to sing with to keep myself going career-wise. I encountered a church that was welcoming of LGBTQ plus people. And I was like, what? It was in Metro Atlanta, and they were advertising for a soprano in Creative Loafing, which is kind of a subversive newspaper anyway. So yeah, meeting this choir director who was gay, meeting gay people in the congregation. I mean, I was even surprised that there was a woman minister. That's how little I knew about progressive Christianity. And so it was wonderful. I was able to come out in that church. I also started my journey towards ministry in that church. It was not a UCC church. And when I say they were welcoming of me as a queer person, they were not inclusive of me as a person called to ordained ministry who was also queer, who also has a psychological disability. Both my queerness and my PTSD were considered reasons why I was not called into ministry. And so I'm really grateful to have found the United Church of Christ, because even though that previous church was the one where it was the only experience that I had of God in Christ. I had learned enough through the reading and through the individual relationships to know that God is okay calling someone like me into service. And so if that institution couldn't deal with it, I say as I make the square, a square institution couldn't deal with it, then what about this one that this other person was telling me about? They're telling me about the UCC. And so I come over here and go, for so many reasons, including their acceptance and completely progressive inclusivity towards everyone. The first UCC church that I belonged has signs everywhere that say everyone, 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 everyone. I'll go and call them out. Kirkwood UCC in Atlanta, Georgia, Reverend Susanna Davis. I mean, I used to count how many times she'd say everyone in the intro to communion. Everyone, everyone, everyone. I'm like, oh yes, and I felt it and I lived it, and it just increased my faith while also increasing my confidence in my own identity, and finally getting me to a place where I could come out as trans as well as queer in orientation. And so, yeah, my faith is a very queer faith, and my queerness is a very faithful queerness.
I love that. And I hear in that just the absolute vital need for affirming and inclusive congregations. That, you know, it's one thing. It's necessary to start with, you know, welcoming people in the door, but also you need to affirm their calls to ministry and support them on their journeys. And, you know, that I think all of that story is a testament to the power of congregations that do that.
There's a huge difference between welcoming and including and valuing. And yeah, absolutely. I'm very proud to be part of all of that. What's your story, Becca?
My story is I'm more of a just theological orientation, you know, that like I said before, that for disability and queerness both being about possibility, it just makes so much intuitive sense to me to imagine God as queer and disabled, to imagine God taking on all of the innumerable possibilities of expression and relating and gender, if we want to give gender to God, which sometimes we do and sometimes we don't, and just all of that possibility of queerness and all of the ways of doing things of disability. One of my favorite things about the disability community is the many different ways that disabled people find to do the stuff that they need to do in a day, and the things that disabled people do to get stuff done that able people wouldn't even think of. You know, the most obvious thing is, you know, I'm blind, I'm a Braille reader, I can do stuff that sighted people can't do. I'm looking at my notes right now, and I'm also looking at the screen, and no, the notes are not on the screen. So, you know, I think of God that way, of God, you know, looking at something that feels like a limitation, and sometimes it is, sometimes it really is a limitation, and also finding ways to do things that no one thought was possible. And my relationship with God, my connection to God has just been so much stronger since I came to think of God that way. And, you know, some of it is just understanding God as being similar to me, but some of it is just remembering that as much as these particular identities and similarities happen to match up to mine, what they actually point to is the fact that God exists way beyond any categories that I can come to, and queerness and disability point me to that.
We are all made in the divine image. Yes, even you, Becca. Yes, even me. And yes, even Helen. Everybody in this. All of us.
Amen and amen. So the next thing I have on my list here is resources, but we've got a few minutes in our time. Is there anything coming up for either of you that you want to touch on a little bit more, either in something you said or something someone else said? Great. Well, let's get to some resource sharing then, shall we? So what we're now going to do is we're each going to name a couple of writers, artists, activists, etc., working at the intersection of queerness and disability, because there's just such a volume of work out there that we want to make sure that you all know about. We're only going to name a few here, but there will be a larger resource list that will be sent out in the follow-up email after the webinar. So Helen, do you want to share a couple of resources?
Sure, would like to. And, thanks for inviting us in to answer just improvisational. I just thought my answer would be way too long because I was too excited. So I made a decision not to jump in it, but that was my reason, because we're short on time, and you know me, I'm all about yeah, let's have this conversation.
Your excitement is more infectious than COVID, Helen, and I love it. Keep it coming.
Amen.
So I'm trying to figure out the balance here. So, anyway, see, I took up time, but I was, here we go. So we're going to go with resources. Since we're coming into, MLK's birthday and whatnot, I thought I would raise up BIPOC, queer, disability organizations and community members that have taught me a lot in my life in terms of racism and how to have that conversation in community. And this goes way back. I've been so thankful for these organizations and individuals and people. So Sins Invalid, which is a wonderful LGBT queer BIPOC artist community that's here in Berkeley area in California, is a wonderful organization. I did put together a list that hopefully everybody will be able to get. It's a wonderful organization. It actually has things that you can get involved with if you're an artist yourself. So I invite you to get to know Sins Invalid. Also, Leroy Moore, who is an advocate, African-American Black history. He's one of the top. He's in my area. He's down in school, UCLA right now, studying, but he's one of the founders of Crip Hip Hop Nation. I don't know if any of you guys heard the track of Rising Phoenix, of a film that came out. Anyways, I'm providing that link and a resource to Leroy Moore, and you can read all about him, as well as Rising Phoenix. And then there's Mary R. I can never pronounce her last name because I can't do my R's right, Palacios. She's a phenomenal dancer. She's a phenomenal artist. You'll also see her highlighted in Sins Invalid. Gave you some information about her as well. What else do I have on my information list? Oh, and Superfest is a foundation of where I come from in the arts. That is a film festival. It's the longest running historical disability film festival. It has always invited queer artists, transgender artists, you name it, you'll see some fabulous films. And I'm providing that resource so you can get to know some of the different individuals or different people that maybe you've seen. Of course, there is a Netflix Crip Camp, Corbett O'Toole that I mentioned earlier. She's in this film. And she's one of my mentors. So throughout disability history, queers have always been front and center. LGBT queers, it's always been invited in. I think it's depending upon where you're from and the group of community that you're with, though. I do understand that it's not all the time invited in. So it depends upon, I think, what Jess tapped on. Sometimes churches, community, however far outreach you go as there's always people that might be uncomfortable and hasn't dealt yet with their discomfort or having the dialogue or being able to open the dialogue. And I guess in many ways to end this, so I don't go too long because the resource will be provided for you. I think it's always important to get uncomfortable, have those awkward moments. Have the conversation and the dialogue. You walk into a situation to be part of. Don't automatically think that you have to have a certain amount of things before you feel a certain way. Allow that, breathe into being uncomfortable, and then breathe out and get to know each other. And that's my wrap up in its exciting way. I have more in my mind right now, but I'm just gonna zip.
Thank you so much, Helen. I always love those resources and that reminder to lean into discomfort. I also want to especially underscore, Helen mentioned Sins Invalid right at the top, and I want to particularly highlight that the members of Sins Invalid and other queer disabled people of color were the first people to coin the terms disability justice, which is a particular way of doing disability work that centers the experiences of the most marginalized, so queer, disabled, trans people of color, and focuses on community support and building access together. And disability justice is an orientation that many groups, including the UCC Disabilities Ministries Board, are trying to take in their work. And we, those of us who are white people, need to particularly take the time to honor Sins Invalid and other queer disabled activists of color. So thank you, Helen. Jess, do you have resources that you'd like to share?
Well, a lot of my work really specializes in trauma. So, you know, I've got all of my trauma resources, and then I've got my queer resources. So in terms of intersectionality of disability and queerness resources, I tend to look to Helen. And so I'm going to toot our own horn here and say that as was mentioned at the top, all three of us are members of the UCC Disabilities Ministries Board of Directors. Becca and I are co-chairs. Helen does our amazing online presence. Especially check out our Facebook, UCC Disabilities Ministries. Helen's always posting articles and resources and all this stuff to just get you fired up for the life. I see that Jennifer's been putting links to all of this in the chat, so check that out there. Also uccdm.org. We're probably going to have a resource list there as well as sent out in this. I know that's something we were talking about. And yes, we did recognize as we were starting this that much to our chagrin, the three of us on here do happen to be white. We very much want to bring in and amplify the voices of people of color who are also disabled, who may or may not also be queer. Intersectionality as a term comes from the Black queer community. So we want to honor that and do justice to it. And so we are very much hoping to bring more voices into our board. So definitely get involved with our Facebook, with our webpage. Reach out to us. We're trying to reach out to you. Come join us.
Absolutely.
Interact with us on Facebook. Share with us if you have resources you want to share, so we can build a larger community, so people in the church don't feel isolated or alone, that they have a way to connect. I think connection is a vital part of what a church has to offer. It's a path we walk together in our faith and belief of creating community in the image of God, right? And feel free to share. I like to interact on Facebook when people do post and share. Have a conversation with me if you want. I've been doing communications in the disability community for over 35 years. I've worked heavily in media to make media more inclusive at a time when there was no funding for it. So we're at a wonderful place to interact with each other now on this wonderful technology that I will make accessible for you if you need it. I do AT as well.
And I'll let y'all know, we've got a comment in the chat from Allie Bell that we need to talk to Reverend JJ Flagg. He's a member of our board already. We love JJ. We were really hoping he could be involved in this. Unfortunately, his schedule did not allow for it.
But JJ yes, is amazing. Thank you for
JJ is a very well-beloved member of our board. And as Helen said, speaking of getting involved and interacting with us and everything, we like to remind people that the board of directors is not the entirety of UCC Disabilities Ministries, that we welcome involvement from everyone to go back to that word. So yes, let's all coordinate our efforts and bring in a wide variety of people. We're always looking for members at large, as well as bringing in new directors. But yeah, Disabilities Ministries is for all of us,
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and to that point, like, I am sure that many of you, I can't read the chat, but I'm sure that many of you participating in this webinar have your own resources on queerness and disability to share, and please share them. Let's keep this conversation going. Mine that I'm going to lift up are the book Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice by Leah Lakshmi Peepshna Samara Sinha. They are a queer disabled activist of color who's associated with Sins Invalid. And they wrote this just amazing book that is partly, chronicles of their life being queer and disabled, and in a large part, a primer on doing disability justice work in very queer and BIPOC spaces. So that is an amazing resource. And then I also want to lift up the work of Eli Clare, who is a queer disabled activist and writer, authors of the book Exile and Pride and Brilliant Imperfection. And Eli Clare was one of the first people doing disability justice work that I read in my queer studies class. And his work has just influenced me so incredibly much. Lots of work talking about the relationships between queerness and disability, the ambiguity of cure and body modification and transition, so many cool things. Please go read him. So thank you both so much for sharing all those resources. Do we have some questions in the Q&A box?
Yes, we do.
Awesome.
And we've got one from someone who apparently lives just down the street from me. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. We've got Mitch Grauberger from Richfield, Minnesota. He sent the first question. He asks, have there been times your disabilities have gotten in the way of how you feel called to serve with the church? Mental health making it difficult to make it through school/seminary, physical health making mission/labor service hard, difficulties with reliability due to flare-ups. Don't I know about that? How do you navigate that? Since you're my neighbor, I want to start because a lot of that was what I was talking about in my connection between queerness and faith. That yes, being a queer person in the denomination that I started in was very problematic for them. It was not problematic for me. However, my calling was to hospital chaplaincy, which means that it's not always just the church that has to be accepting. It's the hospital, the city, the environment that has to be accepting. And before the Supreme Court made it illegal for anybody anywhere to be fired for being queer, I lived in states where it was legal. So I've lost jobs multiple times in ministry due to being queer. Also disabled, but then they said, oh no, we fired you because you're gay, because that's legal. And yeah, it was really hard to make it through school, and especially through seminary, because anybody who's been through seminary might be able to tell you that it's very emotionally distressing. It's going to take your faith, take it all down and give you the bricks and say, there, rebuild it. And if you're really invested in that, that can be very emotionally draining, as well as physically exhausting. And so as I was going through intensive trauma therapy at that time, and I didn't yet have a service animal to help me through, being in class sometimes was just too much. I was harassed in classes sometimes, and I had flashbacks in classes sometimes. I was kicked out of a class once because I had a flashback in the middle. I was taken to the hospital during a class once because I had a flashback and fell out in a catatonic response. It made things very difficult. And yet here I am. I'm ordained, I'm board certified, I'm out proud and very included and valued and accepted, both in my church community and in my work community. So although it was difficult, muscling through as best I could, learning how to actually state my needs and ask for them, knowing that I deserve to have my needs met, and having a very good therapist. That was absolutely invaluable. Do either of y'all, Becca or Helen, have anything else on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I'm visually impaired, and one of the major consequences of my life with that is that I don't drive. And that is kind of a thing that comes up a lot in ministry. And okay, so you're going to be a pastor, you're going to work for this church. Well, how are you going to visit church members? And, okay, if we're going to get parishioners to give you a ride, how are we coordinating that? And just the added logistics that come up. And just the startling number of things in ministry that people expect a sighted pastor, and so that makes the me showing up something that we now need to have a conversation about, as opposed to something that just is. The number of times that something may be communicated in body language. Oh man, serving communion where people come up to receive communion. Whole thing for me, trying to figure out when somebody's in front of me and getting the cues to figure that out. But these are, I kind of want to make a distinction. It's not always a clear distinction, but a distinction between the things that are hard as just, a consequence of the disability itself, and things that the church and society make harder because ableism. There are some things about being visually impaired that are just going to be a little harder because it's sometimes hard to do stuff without sight. But there are a lot of things that people don't think that I can do that in fact I can, or can if the right accommodations are put in place. And I also want to take this moment to lift up, I am a member in discernment currently in the ordination process, and this hasn't been an issue in my ordination so far, but I have a lot of worries about going into the search and call process as a queer disabled woman. I very much want this denomination to be a place that wants to call and ordained queer disabled people. But I think we all know we have a lot of churches that are not those places. So yeah, that my call to all of us would be to create more of those spaces, to be the church that we want to be. Helen, do you have anything you want to add to this question, or should we move on to another one?
Oh, I'd add a little bit. I have rolled in this path all my life, with or without support, with knowing, with not knowing. I guess, again, that's why my question earlier on, when I answered it, was about community in the church being huge. And so I guess the path that I roll in here has a lot to do with faith in community, belief in community, because we do need each other. I need each other as my disability changes throughout my life. That's the same as figuring out who I was. If it wasn't for the queer disability community that I got to be part of because I am an artist, I would not have been able to understand that the world is just a lot bigger than I am. And all these things that may affect me or stress me out or feel not welcome, that there's always going to be welcoming to be found. So that's where I put my faith in how I roll here in life. Because I'm not studied in theology or anything like that. This is just what it has been. I understand too, just a funny story here. I've experienced what it's like to create a miracle, right? I was teaching senior citizens computer technology and offering my time at our local senior centers here. And I didn't even know my value until then on what I was teaching, when these individuals were so amazed that they could change their font size so that they could see their mobile phones, so that they could actually utilize it. I mean, and when you think about the gifts that you have, a miracle is right at your fingertips in order to be able to help somebody else. So, and I bring it back on into, you know, just where I put that with all the struggles is community and faith. And when I need support, I turn to art for my own expression, to work all those things out, because life is never going to be perfect. I love its imperfections. When I need to express the not fitting in, I usually put it into some sort of piece or and the like. I'll just leave it there. Head's going with all kinds of ideas now. Thanks a lot for the question.
Well, we've got 3 more questions. I'm going to go to the one that was earlier in the chat, but then there's another one that I specifically want on Helen, because it's all resources. But the one from the chat from someone in your neck of the woods, Helen, from out in California, Michael Shepard asked, how do we perform to hide or demonstrate our identities to have access to and belong to communities? One of y'all take that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think question number 1 is, do
he
you
says
want
he was
to?
just paraphrasing Helen, but I'm still going to leave it as a question, Michael, because it's good.
No, that
That
was
is good. That's
that
very
was
good.
a wonderful snap. That actually helped me to focus. Thank you, Mike. That's wonderfully put. Yes.
I'm sorry, Becca. Go back. Do it.
Yeah, no, I think like the first question to me, I think, is, do we want to? You know,
Right.
that you know, I think you know, what Helen was saying at that time, and things that in my own life as well, that like if your disability is not as visible, it can feel important to either perform that, to be part of the disability community, or to hide it, to not be the victim of ableism in the particular ways that visibly disabled people are. And for queerness, yeah, like I've definitely been part of queer spaces that if you didn't look queer enough, they didn't believe that you were queer, and didn't want you to be there, because they wanted to make sure that they were curating a safe space. Oh, yeah. And so, you know, I think rather than moving towards like, you know, how do each of us perform, you know, how do we extend grace to each other to not perform?
I dance with it. I'm just going to call it dance, no matter how, or move with it, however your body moves, or however you feel a sense of breath, you know, breathe in or breathe out with it. Because in any community you are in, there's always going to be people that you're not going to get along with. There's always going to be people that may not understand you, even in the disability community. You know, yeah, my hidden disability never had rights, you know, until, you know, so even after the ADA was passed, I still needed to wait for rights. I think it's breathing in and breathing out of it, so you don't get stuck in a place where you feel that you have to be a certain way. So I'm just going to say, embody your full self, whoever you are, whatever it is for you, and dance.
Love that.
Beautiful.
I noticed the time, we're running short. We've got 2 more questions. I'll just give them in the order they came in. Pat Harris asked, can you suggest a primer? There's that resource. Can you suggest a primer for someone just beginning to learn about the multiplicity of genders? I'm so not the resource person.
Helen, do you have something on that?
Off my head right now, no, but I think checking out Sins Invalid might open you up, because I think it has several, you know, Sins Invalids, really their focus is art. So, you know, there's different ways of investigating those areas. That's where I would start. There is a phenomenal fashion artist. Her name, their name is Sky Kubaka. She's part of the community down here. She often talks about identity areas. Sorry, I'm trying to go into my encyclopedia head, but I'd be more than happy to click this in my memory banks.
Yeah, put them in our Facebook if you, as they come up to you. Mitch Grauberg, again, spoke up with a book called The ABCs of LGBT. I'm not familiar with it, but why not? And I just got the okay from Jennifer to go ahead with the last question, as long as we keep it quick.
I'll just put in
yes.
For the previous question, the transgender studies reader could be helpful for a more academic view. And Eli Clare's writing that I mentioned earlier is not a primer by any means, but if you want kind of a inside look at someone talking about their own journey with gender outside the binary, that's a great place to start.
You know, and I'm gonna tag this in my head, so I'll start to look for resources for children as well, because it's not just an adult issue here, and I think it's important too. So thanks for that question. It got me thinking deeper in terms of, hey, all my resources, did I provide any children's things? No, I did not. So my apologies and my resources, but I'll get on this one that way.
No worries. All right, last question, Jess.
Last question. It begins with some comments from Joe T. I am sorry for all the struggles you went through. We are all children of one God. Amen, Joe. We all, as fallen humans, have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Again, amen, Joe. I believe the Bible is the inspired word of God for teaching and rebuking. How do you respond to someone who questions your Christianity as an LGBTQ community member? My answer is that I no longer do.
Yeah, that's about where I'm at too.
Yeah, I mean, I want to, because as a minister, preaching and teaching is part of the work, you know, and so I want to. Right now, it's so exhausting simply not being put down by some of the discrimination, especially since I only pretty recently came out as genderqueer. It's pretty exhausting. I see Roberto giving me an amen. But I do want to one day get back to a point where I can be a good educational advocate and say, you know, because I noticed Josh Blakesley is in the audience. I want to give a shout out to him because I used to go to his church, Love in Action, in Pennsylvania. And we used to work together with Interfaith Philadelphia that did this great civil conversations format where it really brought people together with widely differing views and enabled us to have civil conversations with one another in a specific format. So I want to, thank you, Josh, he's sending me much love, back at you. I want to be able to live that format and really have these civil conversations with people, giving them the benefit of the doubt that they actually do want to learn more about how I reconcile the two. But right now, it's just so hard for me not to hear it as this person just hating on me and I don't want to feed a troll. How do y'all deal with that?
We got to wrap this up pretty quickly, but Helen, do you have a few words?
Well, I breathe in and out of it. I like to have conversations when I am prepared to. It's not like I jump into a conversation on a day where I'm not. I have had to do that in my life. But I breathe in and out of it. I think, you know, in the lesbian community that I was in the theater arts with and performing arts with, I had to educate on disability there. So, you know, no matter what community that you are in, at least how I have learned it, I always make sure in my life I have room to have a dialogue so that I can have these conversations with people in terms of who I am as a Christian. I could have that conversation, how I feel about it. I am made in God's image, and that is what I am going to say each and every time. I am made of love. I am made of lovely imperfections. You know, that is just how I see life. And there's not, the Bible itself is one big mystery. That's what we're here to discover together in community. And that's basically my viewpoint on the Bible, is the mystery is always here. It's always educating. It's always learning. And do you want to participate? So that's my definition, you know.
Absolutely. We are so out of time, but I will say I answer with my ministry. I answer by living out my faith and hoping that that will show love and compassion and a commitment to justice, and that maybe someday the people who question me will see that.
Real quick from the chat, we've had, I want to make sure that the two of you know that we've had so many people expressing thanks, and I want to thank everybody watching this. That's so awesome. We got thanks from Roberto, giving us blessings and cheers. And also Pat Harris asks if we can have more conversations on this topic. I'm down for it. But for now, I know that Becca wanted to offer us a benediction before we say ciao.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thank you to Jess and Helen, to everyone here. Thank you again so much to Roberto, Jennifer, Chris, and Laurel. And now let us close for now to continue the conversation. But for now, a word of prayer. God of infinite intersections and possibilities, thank you for showing up today and blessing this conversation. We know that you share our commitments to love, access, and showing up as our full selves. Help us all to share love, receive access, and create spaces that are safe for all of our full selves. Amen.
Amen.
Siblings and sisters and brothers in Christ, if this conversation has moved you, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed into the rest of your day and know that you are not alone, and we are holding you in prayer. Amen.